A college student disappeared without a trace. A wealthy man pulled the trigger in his own mansion, and an entire city decided to keep its silence. Savannah, Georgia, city wrapped in Spanish moss, whispered ghost stories, and a reputation for southern charm. By day, it's a postcard cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages, elegant mansions with wrought-iron balconies. But by night, the shadows tell a different story. One of power, desire, and a murder that nearly tore the city apart. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a case where money, influence, and secrets shape the outcome of justice itself. And what happened inside the Mercer House mansion in the heart of Savannah's historic district would haunt the town for decades. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the hidden stories of quiet towns with the darkest secrets. The year was 1981. The air in Savannah was thick with summer heat, and the streets buzzed with the illusion of peace. Tourists strolled the squares, families gathered on porches, and the town's wealthy elite prepared for another season of high society galas. Among them was Jim Williams, a self-made millionaire, antiques dealer, and one of Savannah's most prominent figures. He was admired, envied, and feared. A man who built his empire restoring the city's historic homes, earning a place at the top of Savannah's elite social ladder. But Williams had a secret. His life was not as polished as the antiques he sold. Behind the closed doors of Mercer House, his personal world was far darker. He was known for his explosive temper and for the younger men who drifted in and out of his life. Among them was Danny Hansford, a 21-year-old described by friends as hot-headed, reckless, and unpredictable. Their relationship was volatile, a dangerous mix of attraction, dependency, and rage. On the night of May 2nd, 1981, inside the grand rooms of Mercer House, everything came to a breaking point. A gunshot echoed through the mansion. By dawn, the story of what happened would shake Savannah to its core. Police arrived to find Danny Hansford dead shot in the chest. His body lay sprawled on the floor of Williams's study, blood soaking into the antique carpet. Williams, calm and composed, told detectives it was self-defense, that Hansford had lost control, pulled a gun first, and forced his hand. But something in his tone, in the way he stood there as if rehearsed, felt off. Rumors spread quickly through Savannah's cobblestone streets. Some whispered that Williams had finally snapped after years of tolerating Hansford's violent outbursts. Others insisted that it wasn't rage at all, that it was passion, jealousy, control that pushed him to pull the trigger. And then came the question no one dared ask out loud. Would Jim Williams, one of Savannah's most powerful, may never truly face justice? Or would his influence bury the truth, just as the city had buried so many of its secrets before? What seemed like a straightforward case of murder was about to spiral into a labyrinth of corruption, cover-ups, and courtroom drama unlike anything the town had ever seen, because Jim Williams would not stand trial once, not twice, but 4 separate times. And with each trial, Savannah's carefully built facade of beauty and grace would crack open to reveal the rot underneath. This is not just the story of a killing. It's the story of how a city chooses silence over truth, reputation over justice, and how one man's fall from grace became the ghost that still lingers in Savannah's historic squares. But what no one knew on that hot May night was that this murder wouldn't just expose the darkness inside Mercer House, it would expose Savannah itself. Savannah had always lived in 2 worlds. By daylight, it sold its beauty, the Spanish moss swaying like curtains, the gentle hum of cicadas, the squares lined with fountains and statues that seemed frozen in time. But beneath the surface, there was another Savannah, one built on whispers, scandals, and secrets that polite society never spoke of out loud. And no one embodied that contradiction more than Jim Williams to the outside world. Williams was the perfect success story. A man who rose from modest beginnings to become one of the wealthiest and most respected figures in Savannah. He restored old mansions, hosted glittering parties, and cultivated an image of refinement. Politicians courted him. The local elite admired him. Journalists often painted him as the man who single-handedly preserved Savannah's charm. But behind the polished facade, Williams had a darker reputation. Those closest to him described him as controlling, obsessive, and quick-tempered. His relationships with young men, often much younger, were no secret to those in his inner circle. But in the conservative South of the early 1980s, they were. Certainly not something society would forgive if brought into the light. And then there was Danny Hansford. Danny was the kind of young man who seemed destined to burn bright and fast. Just 21 years old, with a rough childhood and a restless temper. He was described as charming one moment and explosive the next. Friends called him unpredictable, reckless. He had a reputation for drinking, fighting, and getting into trouble with the law. But beneath the chaos, some believed he was simply a lost kid, searching for someone to anchor him. That someone, for a time, was Jim Williams. Their relationship was as volatile as gasoline near a flame. Williams provided Danny with money, cars, and a lifestyle he could never have afforded on his own. In return, Danny gave Williams companionship, and in his chaos. Witnesses later described arguments that could be heard from inside Mercer House, shouts, slamming doors, threats, the kind of tension that made people cross the street just to avoid walking near the mansion when the two were at it. Neighbors whispered. Friends worried, but in Savannah, people didn't interfere with the lives of the elite. What happened behind closed doors stayed there until May 2nd, 1981. That Saturday night started like so many others. The city was alive with the sounds of jazz spilling out of bars, tourists wandering River Street, and the faint smell of salt drifting in from the coast. Inside Mercer House, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Danny had arrived agitated, perhaps drunk, perhaps angry over something trivial that had escalated far too quickly. What followed, according to Williams, was chaos. He would later tell police that Danny flew into a rage, pulling out a pistol and threatening to kill him. Williams, fearing for his life, claimed he reached for his own revolver. Shots rang out in the stillness of the mansion. When the smoke cleared, Danny Hansford was lying lifeless on the Persian, rug of Williams' study. Self-defense. That was the story. But the first responders weren't so sure. The scene felt too neat, too orderly, as if Williams had carefully arranged it before calling the police. His calm demeanor only added to the suspicion. While most people, faced with such violence, would be shaking, panicked, or distraught, Williams was almost unnervingly composed, and in Savannah. That composure sparked questions that no one dared to voice too loudly. Was this truly a desperate act of self-preservation? Or was it something else in execution born from obsession, power, and control? The police were about to find out, or at least, that's what Savannah thought. Because what began as a homicide investigation would soon spiral into something far bigger. Something that revealed just how deeply influence and reputation could manipulate justice in a small southern city. And as the case unfolded, Savannah itself would be forced to confront its darkest truth. When the killer is one of your own, how far will you go to protect him? The moment officers stepped into Mercer House, the weight of the crime hung heavy in the air. The mansion's study smelled of gunpowder and old wood polish. Light from the chandelier reflected off the polished furniture, glinting against the revolver that Williams had carefully set aside. And then there was Danny. His body lay twisted on the carpet, blood darkening the intricate Persian pattern beneath him. A young life ended in seconds. A life that, whatever its chaos, hadn't deserved such an ending. Jim Williams was waiting calmly, almost unnervingly so. He told police it had been self-defense. Danny, he insisted, had aimed a gun at him. He had no choice. He had fired 3 times, striking Danny in the chest. But detectives noticed details that didn't quite fit the position of Danny's body. The placement of the gun, the lack of gunpowder residue on his hands. Small things. Subtle things. The kind of details that whispered rather than screamed, but that whisper was enough to raise doubt. The whispers grew louder when they spoke to those who knew the pair. Friends described arguments that spiraled out of control, Danny's desperate threats to leave, and Williams's inability to let him go. This wasn't the story of a burglar breaking in or a stranger attacking in the night. This was personal, intimate, messy. And then came the first twist. Williams wasn't just anyone. He was one of Savannah's most powerful men, the preservationist, the socialite. The man whose money had touched every corner of the city. Was arrested and charged with murder. Shockwaves rippled across Savannah. For many, the idea of Jim Williams sitting in a jail cell seemed unthinkable, impossible, but the state pressed forward. In 1982, the first trial began. The prosecution painted Williams not as a victim, but as a manipulative man who had grown tired of Danny and orchestrated his death to free himself. They argued that he had staged the crime scene, carefully arranging the body to support his claim of self-defense. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a picture of a relationship that had been unraveling for months. The defense, however, leaned on Williams's reputation. They reminded the jury of his contributions to Savannah, his refined character, his calm explanation that he had simply acted to save his own life. The trial ended with a guilty verdict. Murder. Life in prison. But the story was far from over. Williams had money, he had influence. And he had lawyers who knew how to find cracks in the system. An appeal was filed. Conviction was overturned. So began one of the most extraordinary sagas in Georgia's legal history. 4 separate trials, each peeling back new layers of Savannah's carefully constructed facade. Each trial revealed more inconsistencies. Forensic experts debated the trajectory of the bullets, the blood spatter, the positioning of the body. Witnesses contradicted one another. Some claimed Danny had been volatile, even dangerous. Others insisted Williams was the true aggressor. And all the while, the city of Savannah watched in fascination and horror. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was theater. Reporters filled the courtroom. Sketch artists captured every expression, and the public whispered about every revelation. The genteel city, with its manicured squares and historic homes, has become the stage for a murder drama unlike anything it had ever seen. And the longer it went on, the more it became clear this was not just about guilt or innocence. This was about power, influence, and how far Savannah's institutions would go to protect one of its own. Because as the second trial loomed, and another jury prepared to decide Jim Williams's fate, one question haunted every corner of the city: was justice in Savannah even possible? By the time the second trial began, Savannah wasn't just following the case. It was consumed by it. The city's genteel facade of oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, of whispered secrets exchanged at garden parties, was peeling away. Beneath it lay something darker, something rotten. In the courtroom, the stakes felt heavier than before. Williams's legal team had sharpened their strategy, dissecting the state's evidence piece by piece. The revolver, the bullet trajectories, placement of Danny's body. Every detail became a battlefield. And then came the shocking testimony. A forensic expert took the stand, casting doubt on the prosecution's theory. According to his analysis, the scene might have been consistent with Williams's story after all. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Suddenly, the neat narrative of cold-blooded murder was unraveling. The verdict: mistrial. For the second time, Savannah gasped. But the state wasn't done. A third trial followed. This time, prosecutors pushed harder. Introducing evidence they claimed proved manipulation, pointing to Williams's icy composure as a mask for calculated violence. Witnesses were called, including former friends and employees who painted him as controlling, dangerous, a man who demanded loyalty at any cost. Still, the jury couldn't agree. Another mistrial. The drama had stretched into years. Newspapers across the country began to cover it, dubbing it the trial that wouldn't end. For Savannah, the case was no longer just about Jim Williams or Danny Hansford. It was about the city itself, its reputation, secrets exposed under the harsh light of national scrutiny, and then came the fourth trial. By now, nearly a decade had passed since Danny's death. The one-sung socialite was aging, his health fading, but his determination intact. Williams's defense team had honed their argument into a razor's edge. Self-defense, plain and simple. They called new experts, dismantled the inconsistencies, and hammered away at the prosecution's narrative until it collapsed under its own weight. This time, the jury deliberated. Hours passed. Whispers filled the courtroom, and then at last the verdict was read. Not guilty. Jim Williams walked free. The courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in applause. For some, justice had finally been served. For others, it was proof of what they had feared all along, that wealth and power could twist the scales of justice until they broke. But freedom came at a cost. Williams returned to Mercer House, his once vibrant charm dulled, his health in rapid decline. Less than a year after his acquittal, he collapsed in the same mansion where Danny had died. Officially, the cause was pneumonia and heart failure. To many in Savannah, it felt like something else. A curse, a reckoning, final act in a story that refused to end neatly. And yet, the questions lingered. Was Jim Williams truly innocent, a man who defended himself against a violent outburst? Or had he manipulated Savannah's justice system, bending it to protect one of its own? The truth seemed buried somewhere between the oak trees and the marble courthouses, lost in the shadows of Savannah's haunted squares. What was clear, however, was this: the city would never be the same again, because when a town tries to bury its darkest secrets, those secrets always find a way back to the surface. When the final gavel fell and Jim Williams walked free, Savannah exhaled, but not in relief. It was the kind of breath you take after holding in too much smoke. Heavy, poisoned, unfinished. The city's genteel image had been fractured. Tourists still marveled at the cobblestone streets, the iron gates, and the manicured squares. But beneath the postcard beauty lurked a stain that could never be scrubbed away. The Mercer House, once a symbol of wealth and taste, became something else entirely, a monument to Savannah's most notorious scandal. People walked past its brick facade and whispered, "Ghost stories grew." Some swore they saw shadows flicker in its windows at night. Others said Danny Hansford's spirit lingered there, restless, demanding a truth no jury could deliver. For the families involved, the damage was permanent. Danny's mother lived the rest of her days with grief carved into her face, convinced her son had been silenced by privilege. Jim Williams's reputation, though legally cleared, never truly recovered. His final days were lived under a cloud of suspicion, loneliness, and whispers of a curse. And for Savannah itself, the trial became part of its mythology. The case would later inspire books, movies, and endless retellings. But in the quiet moments, away from the flashing cameras, one fact remained: a young man was dead. And the truth about what happened that night in Mercer House might never be fully known, because in Savannah, justice wasn't just about evidence. It was about power, about who you were, about what secrets you could keep buried in the dark soil of Georgia. And perhaps that's the real story here. Not simply the death of Danny Hansford, not only the trials of Jim Williams, but the unsettling reminder that in small towns and even in cities wrapped in beauty, truth doesn't always triumph. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's rewritten, and sometimes it's erased entirely. But what no one can erase is the haunting silence that follows. This was the story of El Secreto de Savannah, and trust me, there are more secrets out there in more towns, behind more quiet facades. It's waiting to be uncovered. So if you want to keep hearing the stories they never wanted you to know, don't forget to subscribe to Quiet Town Crimes. Because in America's quiet towns, the darkest crimes often make the loudest echoes.